Good afternoon. Welcome to today's webinar event. My name is Joshua. I'm going to be your presenter today. I'd like to welcome you. We're here to talk about donations and accounting Vanco Troubleshooting Webinar Part 2 today. And we look at the very first page of the document. It says it's designed to give you tools to troubleshoot discrepancies between Vanco church windows using the Vanco reports. That's the crux of it today. And I do have a copy of this document. I'm going to drag that over here so we can kind of look at that, because this really is what we're using as the basis for the information. And we're going to sit this side by side with regards to church windows so we can get a good idea of what we're looking at. But before we get into that, based on the following procedures, okay, the very first two bullet points there are really, really important for understanding and for the best, most successful use of church windows in relationship to Vanco. If you're using another third-party company, that's not Vanco, PayPal or Tithely or some other e-giving company, this isn't going to pertain to you, okay? This is exclusively Vanco and how it relates to church windows, okay? So one of the things we're going to talk about first, and I kind of alluded to this in the first video, is using batch codes for Vanco is really important for the successful use and the ease of the use of Vanco and church windows, both in donations and accounting. And here's why. When we go up to special functions and settings in the upper left, down here in the bottom left, you see down here it says Vanco import download options. It says use batch codes for credit card and EFT payment methods. And that's a yes or a no field. And then you have to set up and assign the credit card batch code and the EFT batch codes. The Church Windows software and Vanco together will separate those because they do. And it does make the process of being able to, because there are merchant services transactions associated with credit card entries that EFT transactions or online or ACH giving transactions are not assessed at that time. You're basically invoiced for that. And we're going to look at that at the very end. So here we have set up and assigned our credit card batch code and EFT. And we've told it that we do want to use batch codes for those because we're trying to make our life easy. Okay. So we're going to click save through that. And again, it is really because of the merchant services or credit card transaction fees that Vanco assigns instantaneously or at the time that the transactions are processed from the customer or giver's account, as the case may be. So when we go up to our donations and across the top center to transfer to accounting, we're going to see a series of batches which we've imported from Vanco for the month of May, where the software has separated the EFT online donation transactions from the credit card entries. Okay, we've got a whole month's worth of transactions which the software has separated based on that designation of those two batch codes under the settings window and donations. So the software is being instructed, I want to separate my EFT or ACH giving and my merchant services or credit card transactions, whether they share the same data or not, okay? And part of what makes that really important even further, as we alluded to in the first video, was in the upper left here, we see the button, the checkbox that says use batch codes. If we don't check the use batch codes, it's just going to group everything together as one grand total. It doesn't separate out ACH giving from credit card giving at all. It just transfers all over into accounting as one lump sum total into whatever debit asset you're going to choose, okay? That's really important because, like I said, EFT or ACH giving, sure, that can go right into checking even if the date doesn't match, because there are no fees that are assessed on that. The credit card transactions are a different matter, or merchant services, as Vanco mentions on their reports. So all of the information, so let's bring up our report here that shows the Vanco report, or sections of their monthly activity detail activity report. I believe there's also one called weekly activity detail activity report as well. This one happens to be a monthly. Okay. Let me see if I can zoom in a little bit on this maybe. Zoom, there we go. So let's do a quick zoom in on that. But these dates and amounts right here under the transfer donations to accounting window parallel with the information as we see here under the Vanco, like in our account summary. The second part of let me just put it this way, folks. If you use Vanco and you have people that are giving both ACH giving direct debits from their checking accounts or savings accounts and are giving through credit cards, if you don't use batch codes, it's going to make your life a lot more difficult when doing things like reconciling with your bank statement. That's my story and I'm sticking to it. Okay. So, and here we can clearly see by example why that's the case. So the second portion of our document that we printed out shows the breakdown per the Vanco monthly activity report and the various sections that they write into it that you can use to help yourself make these transactions easier to deal with. Okay, so the summary section, as we're seeing right here, details each one, the deposit schedule, the returns and invoice activity for your particular Vanco account or your checking account, as the case may be. Okay, so and we're going to recommend that you use this summary section for the actions and activity and transactions that you post in accounting. Okay, then further down it shows the details section, which helps you answer and find questions and answers to specific detail sections of the detail section of helps you find answers when you're dealing with things like returns or NSF giving, or if you're wanting to be able to see the detail of specific fee transactions for a particular date. Okay, typically you're not going to probably use the detail section too terribly much, but it will help answer questions when you're dealing with things like returns or NSF. So if a giver happens to have a item that was returned or was insufficient, that detail section is going to show you that. Yes, it will show it also up here under the account summary as well, as we can clearly see. That's what we've kind of got highlighted here. We're not going to be working through a return here today, but it does show you the deposit of $25 for 5/7 and then a withdrawal for $25. The detail section would show that as well. Okay, we're not including that here today, but it does. And then further down at the very bottom section of the report under the monthly or the weekly activity report is the fund totals and the detailed grand total. Okay, so it shows you here's how much came in and was given through ACH or EFT giving, and here how much of your merchant services or credit card transactions with their associated fees. Okay, all of these sections will prove to be helpful, but the what sections that you're going to use probably most are going to be the total section at the bottom and the summary section. Okay, and why I'm kind of pointing these out is because as we can clearly see that we have on 5/4 on the report, we have an ACH deposit for 125, and sure enough, over under our transfer donations to accounting, we've got EFT online giving for 125, and then we've got another one for May 2nd for credit card for 180. Okay, that is showing 173.70 on there because the 173.70 is what was deposited into our checking account. Okay, so the fees are the difference between the 180, which was the gross deposit that Church Windows imports for the credit card, and the 173.70, which was ultimately what was deposited into our checking account. This is what stresses the importance and the need for the Vanco holding account. Okay, so you need to set up a Vanco holding account for receiving whatever online giving transactions, and notably the credit card or merchant services transactions, so you can deal with those fees. Okay, so the glossary further, it says here the summary section and grand total sections, as I was pointing out, are most meaningful after Vanco batches have been transferred into your holding account. Okay, detail section is going to be kind of a whole lot of information that you probably won't need too terribly much. Occasionally, but not very much. Okay. So the glossary of dates just simply details what the monthly Vanco or the weekly Vanco weekly activity report with details shows and what they mean. Report date is the date the Vanco sent the original deposit report to the client. So basically the date they initiated the transaction date is the date the deposit is settled with the client's bank. Okay. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's when it's going to show up on your bank statement. That's just when the transaction is settled with the Vanco system. Your bank still may take a day or two to actually reflect that, okay? So as we clearly see, the batch was imported on 5/2, May 2nd from Vanco for these 2 dates, but they were actually settled with the Vanco and the church's bank 2 days later on May 4th, which is really okay, all right? So per the recommendations that we have here at the very, very bottom of the report, it says posting transfers from Vanco Holding to checking account using the transaction date in the account summary. That is going to be the date or whatever date it appears on your bank statement, okay? So even though the batch posts into accounting on May 2nd for this credit card transaction, I can do the transfer from my Vanco Holding account into my checking account with May 4th or 5th or whatever date it shows up on my statement, okay? You decide what date that transfer occurs. And frankly, folks, the same is true for your EFT or ACH transactions as well, okay? In that if the ACH transactions don't wind up hitting your bank account till 2 days later, you can send the ACH transactions into the holding account here by changing this, but you're just less likely to have to do that because the amounts are more likely to match up that way, okay? So that's why that becomes important. I'm less concerned about the dates and the amounts matching up on my ACH transactions. I'm more concerned about the amounts. Yeah, okay, they're within a couple of days. I can deal with that. But if my credit card deposit of 180 shows up on my bank statement or shows up in Church Windows as 180, and the statement only shows 103.73.70, then I'm going to be completely out of whack with regards to that. Okay, so the credit card giving transactions must be transferred into the holding account. Okay. And the final recommendation there, and we got about 5 or 6 more minutes left on our webinar here. We're going to transfer these in, and we're going to go through the transactions real quick in accounting to try to get those posted over, is posting the merchant services fees as one transaction at the end of the month, debit to Vanco fees expense and credit to Vanco holding asset account. That's frankly what we recommend. Don't go in and do the fees on a per transaction basis. You can. I guess it depends on how quickly or how many you want to transfer at any given time into accounting. Okay. Maybe at the very beginning you're not very terribly comfortable with this, initially. So maybe do just a few dates or a couple dates at a time, then go into accounting and post the transactions. Maybe after you're more comfortable with posting, you understand how the process works, maybe you can then come in, transfer in a whole month's worth of transactions into the Vanco holding and into checking, and then post your fees separately. It all depends on what you feel comfortable with, okay? So let's go through it. So here are my online donations, EFT, ACH. I'm good with that for the 125. Why? Because it's a couple days different. I'm going to send that right into my checking account. So I'm going to post that. So we're going to post, and it's going to say, yep, debit 125 into checking, post. Refers me back to my posted transfers. These credit card transactions are the ones where I'm going to change it from my Huntington Bank checking to my Vanco holding account. And then I'm going to post. Okay? Transferring 180 because that's not what's deposited. Then I can enter comments here, Vanco, and it's going to put the Vanco batch code, into these on my bank reconciliation as well for those that transfer in. And then I'm going to do my other one here for May 4th as well, because that is also shown on the document as well. So I'm going to change all of these because they're merchant services or credit card transactions to my Vanco holding account. Okay. So Vanco holding, and post. Okay. So here it is, $364 posting into Vanco holding. And so we're going to leave it at that for right now. Okay. These aren't going anywhere. Now my work is now done in accounting with regards to what I now need to do. When I go into my Vanco holding account under Manage Accounts, and I go to my Balance tab, it's now showing for the month of May the 544 that I've now posted into that. Okay? So then now I'm going to post my fee transaction. Okay, so we're going to go up. So we're going to assume this is the end of the week or the month, and I'm good with that. So we're going to go to other, and we're going to do something like a journal entry transaction, and we're going to backdate this to May, say May 6th, and then we're going to do a debit to fees. Yeah, we'll choose bank fees, and we're going to do debit amount of $19.01 because that's the amount of the total merchant services fee for that day. Then right here, we're going to choose Vanco Holding, and then we're going to credit that because we need to take out the $19.01, which was the total fees for those 2 days, $6.30 on May 4th and $12.71 on May 5th. And I can enter comments of some kind, Vanco fees. Okay, done, add to batch, and post. Before I post, I want to do show running balance. So now notice that my Vanco holding account balance is now down to $524.99, which is the amount of the net deposits that have now been transferred into my checking account. Okay, so now I can go post, and I'm not going to print that. We're going to close out of this, and now I can go up to transactions, transfer, and I can now, per my Vanco report, I can do a transfer for the 173.70 and the 351.29. So I can do those I can backdate that into, say, May 4th or 5th, whatever date I want. It's going to work either way. So we're going to choose Vanco Holding to Huntington Bank Checking because this is what's in supporting my bank statement. Okay, and amount is going to be the 173.70. Vanco deposit. Done, add to batch. I can go, payment method, EFT. Then I can click done, add to batch. I'm going to go right up here, do Vanco Holding again. Tab over, do Huntington Bank Checking. And then the amount, which was, sorry for getting that, folks, the 351.29. So we're going to do 351.29. Payment method, EFT. Again, Vanco deposit. Now click done, add to batch. And if I've done this correctly, it should be 0. And sure enough, my Vanco holding account is now 0. Okay. So I've put the money in per the report, the transaction section of the Vanco report. I've posted those credit merchant services transactions into the holding account. I've posted the fees. I've transferred the net deposits into checking correctly. Now again, I've done this for 2 days. If that's what it helps, folks, for you to use do these in smaller chunks, do that. Nothing says you have to do them a month at a time. You decide what periods you import under your batches. So if you want to do a day at a time, a week at a time, a month at a time, it's your choice. So I can now close my transfers window and I can post those transactions. Okay. So I have now recorded those Vanco transactions, and when I go back to transfer donations, the rest of my batches and dates are there. So I'm sorry, folks, I've gone a couple minutes long here, but there's one more thing I want to mention, and that is that if you look at the last date on your transaction detail section, and whatever that last merchant services transaction is, post and transfer those into accounting. If you've got other dates which have been imported that don't appear on your bank statement until the next month, deal with the current month's transactions first. Let's say this May 27th credit card transaction didn't hit my bank statement until, say, June. I don't have to transfer that in now. I can deal with the May entries first, leave this here. Then after I've satisfied all of my May requirements on my bank statement and Vanco, I can then come back in here and transfer that amount in later and deal with that, with regarding June's statement at that point. Okay? So that, folks, is where we are going to leave today's topic.